Welcome to another episode of Ask the Expert on Contingent Workforce Strategies LinkedIn group. I'm super excited about today. I've known our guest today for quite some time. He is a fellow Canadian, and we've grown up in the industry together and has such a deep expertise in the contingent workforce space and really talking on an important topic, right? Because tail end of last year, you start planning for what's going to happen in 2024. And a lot of contingent programs start thinking about their tools they're going to implement and use. And of course, the system of record, or what I've called as kind of the backbone of a contingent program that helps automate the transactions, are the VMS. And so I'm here with John Clark, who's going
Thank
to
you.
talk to us about some critical advancements in the VMS space to watch in 2024. So, John, with almost over 20 years of experience in designing and building contingent programs, with expertise as an MSP, as an EOR, and of course, VMS technology. Welcome, man. Thank you for taking the time out of your day and having a conversation with us.
Always good to see you, Jeff. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, the VMS has been a very interesting beast over the last couple of years, and there's a real evolution afoot. And I had thought, if I look at the history of VMS, there was, in the early days, a lot of players, a lot of kind of homegrown systems built, and then it really consolidated into kind of two or three big players, right? And then in the last 3 to 4 years, and really rapidly over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of new developments, a lot of new VMSs or VMS-like products coming out in the market. And so, can you lead us with a little bit of an overview and kind of a categorization of what you're seeing in the market today with different tools that are out there that would be quote unquote categorized as a vendor management solution or a tool to essentially automate that rec to check process?
Yeah, for sure. I think historically, the market we know has been dominated by a few big players, right? And those big players, from my perspective, they achieved a lot of growth as the Fortune 500 companies sort of adopted a proper formal contingent workforce program, MSP, VMS. And then what I saw is as those really big providers had basically implemented at most of the big companies, there was this huge gap for all of the sort of companies that had mid-level spend. Doesn't mean you're a mid-sized company, but you might have mid-level spend. So even from an MSP perspective, we saw a trend of providers struggling to get the attention of the big guys for these 10, 20, $30 million programs. And some of them, quite a few of them, decided to build their own, right? Move away from this big ERP, you need a management consultant company to integrate or implement. And they ended up building their own. I think that's also reflective of the broader the broader market across the board for corporations, but heavy within human resources, right? You have HR systems, ATSs, background check systems that are now all super fancy and automated, freelance management systems, all of these fragmented. Now there's explosion of data analytics platforms that aggregate all your data across all your platforms. So I think it was a general explosion, but the gap in the market was, from my perspective, to fill a lot of that untouched sort of mid-level spend that the big guys historically sort of shied away from. So I think that's where we've seen an explosion. Staffing companies that wanted a piece of the tech space that really couldn't get a VMS partner that was suitable. Again, they decided to build their own. There's some staffing companies that will not sell their VMS to anyone else. It's just for them, right? Very specific. So I think that in terms of volume of providers has been a huge factor.
Yeah. So, in thinking about what you said and just kind of simplifying it from okay, you've got the big guys, which are traditionally there's only a few dominant players like that, and they're owned by the ERP solutions companies as well. So there's those. And then, like you said, it's an interesting evolution of a bunch of new, really cool tech coming out from, let's call it, either staffing that develop their own, or an EOR, or even standalone companies that have built technology that are, let's call it, mid-size players in terms of, the size of the programs and their spend versus throughput, versus, let's call it, the big ERPs, which are billions and trillions of dollars running through them. And then this interesting, you've said explosion, and I think it's a worldwide explosion, because we're seeing players coming from all sorts of different areas, not just out of North America, of freelancer management systems, and/or they deem themselves contingent workforce management systems, or they're et cetera, that kind of do that VMS like rec to check functionality, but they may have an EOR component to them, or they're a freelancer management system, and they don't want to be called a VMS, but they have that functionality. So there's kind of those three categories of players in the market we're seeing, right?
Yeah, and the volume of them is increasing dramatically, right? Like you have EOR providers that have amazing functionality, but they really hone in to nail the background check compliance, independent contractor screening process. Like that's their thing. But really, their system can do a bunch of different things, right? So as a client, when you're assessing this market, you're like, where do I even start, right? That's the challenge. So it's like, what problem am I trying to solve? Is it vendors that are out of control, or is it that I have tons of independent contractors that are hidden, buried in a bunch of invoices and contracts that no one knows about? So I
Yeah.
think that's the challenge for the clients as well. It's like, how do I navigate my way through this space? Do I need a gig platform when actually I want a VMS, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, and of course, a lot of their information comes from salesmen and marketing, which tends not. It's I can do anything, and yes is the answer when it comes from that type of source of information. So yeah, trying to keep it clear, and then be well defined on what you're looking for, and then really asking for transparency of the vendors that are talking to you, that have functionalities, like where do you fit into this kind of our ecosystem, and what our needs are, and how do you meet our needs, versus, hey, you're a freelancer management system that can do VMS, let's just fit this square peg into this round hole, and hey, we've got a program, right? And
Yep.
then 5 years from now, you're going to have to replace that because there was conflicts of interest, or it didn't, they were concentrating on placing freelancers and not the VMS technology that you
Yep.
wanted, etc. Right? So you really have to be eyes wide open in this market right now, because there are a lot of players, and there's a lot of, I don't want to call it confusion, but a lot of marketing efforts out there, and just to grab market share, right? So it's important to have
Yep.
those conversations in that. So, um, critical advancements in VMS technology, and some of those, what I see that is trends, right? So what are
Yep.
some of these trends, be it in functionality, in technology trends in general, that you're starting to see in the VMS space, that is interesting to you, and I think probably interesting to a lot of program leads, to say, I should be thinking about this as I'm talking to my current vendor, or evaluating new vendors.
Yeah. So I think, like, from my perspective, like it starts with, I mean, like I've been part of building a VMS from scratch, right? So you have to start with, what gap are you trying to fill, right? Like, what are the problems or frustrations with the existing sort of product market? So things like implementations take a lifetime. They're expensive, right? So like I know companies that have paid, big four firms like $2 million to implement one of the big guys, which is a lot, right? So it takes forever. It's expensive. Even the pricing models, right, have evolved to kind of, like, you see the big guys moving to a license fee, and it's like, well, we'll charge you X million for up to this level of spend. And a lot of it is because clients, promise there's 200 million, and really it takes 5 years to get there, right? And really it's 500 million, they just don't know. But so it's expensive. It's time consuming, cumbersome, and even post implementation, right? Like configuration and customization is just difficult, right? You say, I'd love it if they had a field here, and they're like, email it to our request line and don't call us, we'll call you. And then it just goes into this big giant black hole and you never hear.
Yeah.
Um, so like the cost, the complexity, the changes, like the interfaces, like are super dated in some of the those kind of like legacy but dominant products, and like that does affect adoption, right? Like there's no excuse for an old school interface in this day and age. Like you and I have 100 different apps on our phones, and they're all beautiful. So as consumers, we're conditioned to this like look, feel, easy navigation. So there's like that dated interface has been an issue for our industry. Again, that is changing. There's a few other sort of trends like or sort of legacy issues like poor customer service, which you can potentially solve with technology, but that's a big focus for a lot of VMS providers. Like you'll see it on the NPS scores, right? SIA put out the NPS scores and they're horrendous for our industry. Um, and then a few other things like, once you get to implementation level, you don't have actual experts, with the provider that you've chosen. So that's a big gap as well. So for me, it's like, okay, you start with what have been the legacy sort of frustrations in our space, right? And then from a sort of trends perspective, there's a few big ones. We could talk all day, Jeff, about
Yeah.
functionality
Yeah.
and tweaks here and there that are good, but sort of high level, like I'm seeing like a huge advancement in the tech stack.
Yeah.
So without getting too technical, and I'm not a technical person, but I don't want to bore anyone, but things like your code base, right? Like the original old school sort of Java, .NET, millions of lines of code. You want to change something, someone's got to go back and find out where the broken comma is, right? And those are expensive. They're hard to change. Like you have the big guys that have teams and teams of developers, right? That sort of Java, .NET, as I mentioned, environment. So now it's like, how do you modernize the coding language? And listen, the software space is much bigger than the VMS space, but things like moving away from that old school code to like these like Node and React frameworks that like consume language in any way and simplify the code. And ultimately, it makes it faster, more
Yeah.
efficient, easier to configure, easier to customize, like all of those things that the industry has
Yeah, it's
lacked.
interesting because you kind of never get behind the curtain, let's call it, or under the hood and say, let's talk about product roadmap. And what you're saying is the advancement in architecture of what's out there now allows you to go to market with new features, functionalities quicker. So, if I was on the program side looking at my existing vendors or putting out an RFP right now, I'd say, let's talk about your product roadmap as a differentiator. And, you could see probably more things getting done with more agile technology architecture than, let's say, more the legacy technologies where it is a heavy lift. So you got to put more and more bodies, and maybe they have teams of developers to get a product out quicker. But in a lot of cases, you can see through the product roadmap what the architectures potentially look like and what they're going to add to the product, right? Versus a more agile technology company that's using newer technology may have more on the product roadmap, even though they have less resources to put to those features and functionality because their architecture is easier to deal with and more modern.
Yeah, 100%. Like if you think about it simplistically, like the code, like the big guy's been around since 1999, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you barely had a cell phone at that point, Jeff, right?
Yeah.
So it's like it's been brick by brick by brick, and then to unbuild that is painful, right?
Yeah.
And often not worth the effort. You want to, like, if you're a publicly traded company and your job is to maintain revenue and profit, it's really hard to justify the expense to roll into, upgrading such a monumental task, right?
Yeah. So what are some of the other things that you're seeing out there within the VMS market and in the technology space. We talked about the modernization of the tech stack at a high level, but what other things are you seeing out there that clients are demanding or providers are bringing to the table now that there's some interesting new entrants that are really coming from often from just a technology perspective versus legacy? I've been in the industry for 30 years and I'm building a product, right?
Yeah, for sure. I touched on interface a little bit earlier, but like that's a huge one, right? Like the look feel of a product affects how people use it. And it's not just that, oh, I open it and I'm happy. It doesn't look like Microsoft Access from, Windows 95. It looks
Yeah.
modern, but it's the usability of that, right? Like, do you have sort of card format versus data tables, right? Like, is it easy on the eye to consume from a color perspective? Like, there's all these, like, there's a science behind UI, which is why there's so many beautiful UIs. If you take a really well-funded startup, like they have a sweet
Yeah,
UI, right? Because they
always.
spend a lot of time and money on it,
Yeah.
which makes total sense. And like I've seen it personally from an adoption perspective, like a manager opens a product and they're like, what is this? Like, I just want to post a job. I don't know what the unique identifier codes needs to be in this yellow grayed out table, right? So interface, I've seen a huge one. And even providers that have an updated interface, they're still sort of hamstrung by that legacy code. But definitely like a huge advancement in terms of what I've seen.
That's
Um,
cool. The other thing, and of course, I'm not going to pitch it, but there's a lot of point solutions out there, especially around compliance or background checking, that have been coming into the market that clients are wanting to adopt. Like, what are you seeing and how are they fitting into an ecosystem? And what's important when you're looking at your VMS technology? With this kind of marketplace of apps in our
yeah,
space that are coming. So we saw it in the cell phone market, right? Where there was an app for everything, and in the consumer market, and you wanted a phone that could handle all these different apps that you were downloading onto your phone. I'm finding that there's a lot of point solutions out there that are best of breed that you know are only doing this, like background check, compliance, etc., worker engagement out there. How is this all working together?
yeah, and I think like I mentioned it earlier, like it's symptomatic of the broader market. There's just like tons of options, right? So you have like all these like such a fragmented pool of different tools. Um, so like one of the big trends that I've seen or I'm seeing going into 2024 or in 2024 is like an open access, open API type environment, right? So it's like, how do I get access to my data? I want to control it. Like I'm talking to MSPs and they're like, we have 5 different VMSs, but we have a template that we deliver supplier scorecard into, for example. So they don't want advanced reporting. They do their own. They just want the ability to pull their data easy, put it into their data warehouse, spin it through their BI, so Microsoft BI, Tableau, whatever that may be, so that a program that uses one VMS and a program that uses a different one, have the same sort of look, feel, branding from an MSP perspective. So I think that is like a good example of
Yeah.
having easy access to the data. Customers can consume it on their own, right? Like there's entire companies in the HR space that just do HR analytics. So they pull from payroll systems, HR systems, ATS, and then you have this like centralized dashboard. But that open API structure has been huge for us, huge for the market in terms of a trend. Easier access to the data. It's much faster. You're not building native integration. And then if you have a change down the road, it all breaks. Again, making sure that there's access. And even like from a supplier perspective, if you have an open API, the supplier can go and get their own data as well. And VMSs typically completely neglect suppliers because they're not technically the customer, right?
Yeah.
So the open API has been a huge one. And if you take any like big successful product, CRM companies like HubSpot, etc., like they have APIs to everything.
Yeah.
right? It's like you go into HubSpot API and it's like, click on here to integrate with LinkedIn and
And it
Zoom Info
happens
and
in
all.
30 seconds, right? Yeah. And it asks you
Exactly.
how to map data across, and boom, you're fully integrated between systems. And that's, yeah, that's the new technology people are starting to become accustomed to, right?
Totally. And also, like, it justifies as a business that having five systems to do five different things because they're all really good at one silo, like you said, it's doable. Whereas before that wasn't necessarily the case.
Yeah. And it almost goes back to how the evolution of the overall contingent workforce market ecosystem was, where, in the early days, clients just wanted a silver bullet, and they'd bring in somebody who was an okay MSP, an okay VMS, and an okay EOR, AOR, payrolling company, right? And they were never really awesome at anything. And then you started the evolution of best of breed, and everybody was choosing their lanes, where I'm going to be the MSP. Okay, I'm a VMS, and then I'm a EOR, AOR compliance solution. And you were seeing that choose your lane, and then clients were procuring best of breed, and then having everybody work together in that kind of an ecosystem. And what you're saying with the technology and with all these point solutions that are coming to market is, hey guys, you figure out the integrations. I want to buy you, but I want to buy each of you separately, but I want it to work together seamlessly, and I want it tomorrow. I don't want a 6-month implementation, right?
Yep. And it's a much more client-centric approach, right? To go to a client and say, we already have integrated background check providers. We already have integrated IC compliance tools. Like it's much more client-centric that you
Yeah.
can take it to them instead of having this one big provider, and then you need something outside of that and you're done, right?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense, because the salesmen of all these point solutions are calling, and the demos are happening, and as a program, you want the best of breed in each of these kind of point solutions. How do you make it work with your existing ecosystem? Is so important to have that integrated functionality, or ability to integrate quickly, right? And easily and
Yep.
seamlessly.
Yep.
So what else in some of the trends, and I'd be aghast not to talk about AI in the world these days. What are you seeing in AI? I know there's a lot of advancements and conversations and moving forward in staffing in general, the sourcing of people, the screening of people, etc. What's the thoughts around the VMS? Is that, again, maybe these are point solutions that should integrate in, or is the VMS providers looking at AI as well? And I could see, data reconciliation, data entry, all of those manual processes that the poor MSPs, their program teams, have to deal with within the programs. But if that could be automated through AI, that'd be a dream. But what else are you seeing, and what are some of the VMSs talking about?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One, AI is the most overstated phrase in all industries right now. Like true AI is not how we see it, right? If you take like the large language model, right, your chat GPTs, etc., um, they rely on the data that's input, right? So if you want to pull from the system, you got to participate the other way, right? So where does your data go? So I think the appetite is there because you want to get rid of menial tasks and you want to automate, etc. And then there's a whole bunch of advanced functionality. Like there will be a day soon where it's like, you know, tell me, provide a sample resume of the last five candidates that I've hired and why I liked them, right? And it's like consistencies between profiles, like it's really cool stuff. Um, but right now, the biggest challenge I see is the data piece. Like, where does your data go? Who owns it? You integrate with ChatGPT and you put your data in there because you want them to give you information back. Like, that's a big deal. I saw this in the DE and I space where the appetite was we want to make sure there's diversity in our contractor base. And then the VMS has built it, and the clients were terrified to use it because they're all scared of the
EOC.
sensitivity of
Yeah.
this. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So that's been a huge consideration, and I think there's been apprehension significantly, from the VMS market, but also on the client side. So definitely that data consideration piece is huge. Like I'm seeing a lot of those like automation type tasks, right? Resume matching, and some of it is advanced analytics, etc. But like getting rid of some of those more tactical tasks, even the ability to build rate cards instantly per location, geography. Like there's some really cool trends around that. I think the MSPs and the buyers directly will drive a lot of this. It's like, okay, how can I get rid of headcount, right? How can I stay or become more efficient, with less overhead, which, they're doing it for a selfish reason to drive more profit, but ultimately that should drive cost,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So there's lots of really cool, what I would describe as like tactical trends. But really more sophisticated AI, I think, is super early. And I think 2024 is going to be a huge research year
Yeah.
to iron some of that out, make consumers, the MSPs and the buyers feel safe. And then from there, once we get some case studies, like it will fly. So I would anticipate that next year will be a huge year for actual use cases of this.
Oh, cool. So, like you said, we could talk for hours on all this, but I want to wrap it up. And I usually do by kind of trying to make it a little practical, because we've talked about all sorts of trends, advancements in VMS. We've done an overview of the market, and there's lots of things to think about and lots of things to talk about. But, if I'm a program lead and I'm saying, okay, I'm setting objectives for 2024, and I want to focus on, and of course everything will be different situationally, but what are some of the, if I'm going to focus on implementing some things around the VMS or implementing a new VMS, what are some of the more exciting advancements, in that space that you're excited about? What should I be thinking about? How to implement them? How they benefit? And, how can I start to prepare to move the needle forward, uh, utilizing more advanced technology in that VMS rec to check process?
Yeah, like I think there's obviously two buckets here, right? There's like established programs that have a VMS, and then there's like your Gen 1 program. So I think from a Gen 1 perspective, there are more options than there
Yeah.
ever have been, right? And I think the key is getting your business requirements nailed down correctly. Like, what do I actually need? Like, I always say, like, don't buy a Ferrari if you don't have a driver's license, right? Like, a lot of buyers in the space get sucked into this,
They
like,
do for
yeah, but
Instagram, though. They do it for
yeah,
Instagram. No.
there you go, there you go. But it's like, I can see like these guys have AI or like even SOW, right? That you never will use, or maybe not for 10 years. And it's like, get the fundamentals correct. And then even things like your culture, right? Like, what is my appetite for change? What's my tech stack? Like, all of these different things add up. So assessing your options, doing the business requirements correctly, and buying a product that suits you. Like, Jeff, believe it or not, I know people who have been fired for buying IBM, right? So
Yeah.
it's like you don't always have to go big ticket or quote unquote safe. So there's many considerations if you're Gen 1. The other thing I would watch out for is there are big providers in this space that provide a mid-level spend solution, which to me means that they're admitting that it's inferior. And I don't think that that should be the case. If you have 30 million in spend, there are many, many options that you should assess. So scan the market, attend the conferences, like immerse yourself in this community. Our community is actually very helpful and
Yeah.
collaborative, which doesn't apply for every industry. So there are many ways, understanding the ROI, things like integration points, things like the complexity or even compliance. Like if you're a bank, you may need a different solution than a marketing company.
Yeah.
So that Gen 1 is like looking out for, okay, what will my users engage with? What do I actually need? And then pick a platform that has that, right? And the other part that has surprised me the most in the last 2 years is the appetite to switch VMSs.
Yeah.
And I've been in this industry a long time, and I did not expect it to be this evident that companies are just fed up, right? They want a change, and it's easier to change than it ever has been, right? Like there are VMSs where like we can set you up today. If you take it out of the box, like username, password, and start putting your contractors in this afternoon.
Yeah.
So there are definitely options
Well, and I've
that
seen some platforms actually that have built data migration tools specifically that help migrate data from one VMS to the next, right? And
yeah,
so, that fear of change, the provider marketplace understands it and have built tools
yeah,
to help in that space too.
yeah, it makes total sense. And I think like if you can switch out for a more modern product that has amazing customer service, higher NPS scores, it looks beautiful, and you can get your integrations, etc., up to speed, and then follow their roadmap, like it becomes worth it. And it previously has not been worth it. So I think, even in existing programs, like Jeff, I've been to conferences and it's like a therapy session for massive VMS customers, right? Like there's a huge level of frustration there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, no, it's very interesting, and this is an ongoing conversation. And this time of year, it's the conversation with a lot of programs that are looking at their program and saying, what is some of the goals that we're going to achieve this year? And modernization and implementing some of these new point solutions, and even going as drastically as changing the VMS is on a lot of people's minds. So thank you for your time, your wisdom, your knowledge, John.
Always a pleasure, Jeff.
It's been an awesome discussion. So thanks again.
Awesome. You too. Thanks, Jeff. See you later.